welcome everybody to our weekly virtual forum that we began back in conjunction with IPM anniversary in May 10th this year, and what a year it's been. At that time, we were celebrating, which is hard to believe, our 46th anniversary, and now we're looking forward. Hanukkah's begun, and Christmas and New Year are right around the corner in the new year. So I'd like to welcome you again to what we call IPM Responds, which is a weekly forum that we've been conducting during this pandemic as an opportunity to hear from and learn from one another, and how the IPM family is dealing with all the challenges facing us at this time. There are some new folks on Zoom, and so I'd like to welcome Colleen in particular, I see, and Jane is back with us happily in her retirement, an old friend of IPM, former board member. And we're also joined by staff from India and El Salvador, as well as former board member Anna Gregg in El Salvador as well. This is really, we decided a few weeks ago that we would try to gather every quarter without a very specific agenda, but have a more open-ended conversation about where IPM is, how we're responding to the pandemic, and the challenges that are confronting us as an organization at this point. And so we spoke specifically about wanting to get together in conjunction with the US election and the possible impact of the change in government here now, which looks like is imminent, we can say, and how that will impact our work directly. And I can say, as we talked about in the virtual immersion that Vicky Jimenez coordinated with a group from Seaside UCC here in Maine and Eden Theological Seminary last week, that in many ways changes in the US government don't have as great of an impact as we might think on a place like El Salvador. But certainly there are instances around the world, and with the rise of authoritarianism, where the leaders of the governments of the countries where we work have benefited, if you will, or certainly found solidarity and a soulmate, if I can use the solidarity word in that kind of negative way, the past 4 years. And we know in particular that's been difficult, as we heard from our board member Rodrigo Perret with the situation in Brazil, with Bolsonaro there, in India, with Modi, and in El Salvador, as we heard repeatedly, with Bukele. We also know that there really hasn't been much of a confrontation by the US government in any kind of deliberate way with the dictatorship in Nicaragua, a country that for many of us, I believe, we probably felt quite positively about in the 80s and 90s and the direction that country was heading, but have encountered over the past decade for sure a real rise in authoritarianism there and a crackdown on any kind of civil dissent that is felt by our colleagues and our partners there, who I won't name, because of the real precarious position many of them are in. And our work with the Casa Jaime Mayor there, named for our founder, that's Augsburg College's Center for Global Education, they've highlighted repeatedly how difficult it is becoming even for them to do their work. And we've heard the same from our partners there, and particularly from Fernando Cardenal, who you probably will recall was one of two brothers who were sort of dressed down by Pope John Paul II as they were part of the initial Sandinista government and the culture and education ministries. And Fernando, when he would meet with IPM delegations, literally referred to Daniel Ortega as El Dictador. And there are folks on the call that their Spanish is better than mine, but it was almost impossible for me to be sitting there with Fernando and believe that I was hearing those words uttered from his mouth. So I think no matter where each of us falls on our own political and partisan perceptions in commitments, it's pretty clear that when the US disengages internationally or looks at things with less of a lens of human rights and more of a focus on economic betterment or even private betterment, that allows dictatorships on both the right and the left to sort of run rampant, even if ostensibly they're operating under the guise of democratic elections and democracy. But I don't just want to focus on that negativity. It would be easy to point to Kenya, India, Brazil, Nicaragua, and El Salvador and talk just about what's happening and how difficult it's been. But I'd like to give you at least one example that our colleague Mahesh Upadhyaya, who's on the call, presented a little bit on when he spoke with this group last, but particularly in a year-end report or quarterly report that we share with a number of IPM donors and friends in relation to what's happening in India. And he spoke specifically, if you'll recall, and I believe Hemant mentioned this as well during our board meeting, of the arrest of Father Stan Swami, who's 83 years old, who's the 16th activist to have been arrested recently. 15 other people, activists, poets, doctors, social workers, and intellectuals, have been falsely charged with sedition and this draconian law, the UAPA, as it's known as an acronym, which is against unlawful activities in India. And anything that is even slightly critical of the government there can be seen in that way. We also have seen a continued crackdown on organizations such as IPM, who might, whether they are working in a multi-faith context now or even a secular context, have words in their name or have a history that can sort of be picked apart by the Hindu nationalists as somehow operating in opposition to their desires for India. Laws regarding receiving funds have almost made it impossible to receive foreign funds for smaller groups. We're fortunate that we have a partner, a local partner in Ahmedabad, that is able to process and serve, channel, if you will, donations for us and serve as a partner, an implementing partner in India. And the context of COVID-19, the Indian government has really had a very almost unbelievable ability to use the pandemic as an opportunity to control movements and actions as people are more and more dependent on the internet for their communications. There's also not only are people unable to move and organize in community, but they have to worry more specifically about the way that their internet communications are being monitored literally each and every day. I'm saying some of this myself because it's easier from where I sit to speak openly about this, and clearly part of what we try to do, and we've had these conversations, many of you will know, going all the way back to when Julieta Bora was working with us in El Salvador, to be very careful about how the IPM staff, and particularly the local staff, are perceived, and how working for a small social justice orientated organization like this, without the cachet or the sort of international renown of, say, Medicine Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty, or even church groups like the World Council or Catholic Relief Services, that it might be easier to target staff in a small organization such as this, if the perception is that they are working counter to the government, or frankly, in Julieta's case, maybe even counter to an opposition party that is dominant in a home community. In that case, was at the time in Zaragoza, where we have our office. So I don't want to belabor this, but I use India as an example. I could similarly use Kenya and what's been happening there, Brazil, Nicaragua, as I said, and El Salvador, as we spoke at length last week about how this rise in authoritarianism is impacting our work. I'd say it's really doing so, in summary, sort of in three specific ways. There is a crackdown on dissent and the ability to communicate and organize together, as I've mentioned. There's a crackdown on funding and the inability to provide access to funds directly to the partners in the ways that we might have in the past. And there's really even a crackdown on thought and expression. For the first time ever, and this was little over a year ago now, I remember being in the home of a married couple, and literally one member of the partnership asking me to come indoors because she was afraid of what might be overheard by her spouse on the porch and what that might mean in their local community. So really a crackdown on organizing, a crackdown on funding, and even a crackdown on the way that loved ones are able to interact with one another if there's a perception that they're on the wrong side of whatever the local party is doing. I want to take the opportunity, though, as well, rather than just focusing, if you will, on all the negative, to highlight a couple of the really extraordinary things that are happening with our partners since the last time we really gathered together and were able to talk about this at length. As you all know, and Hemant is on the call, the Pochabai Foundation is our primary partner in Golana in Gujarat, India. And they continue to be a member-based organization working in more than 27 villages with around 700 children and more than 3,000 women who are part of their collective activities. The activities, even during this time of pandemic, are able to involve mobilizing women for their rights and government services to provide value education to children and even a space for them to learn and to have fun. There's a number of activities that were coordinated throughout the year that we've highlighted in earlier presentations, including probably the one thing, I hope this is okay to say, Mahesh, that we're probably most excited about, and that was the joining of Bindia Makwana as a member of the IPM team as a what we're calling a junior fellow. Those of you on the board will recall that 2 General Assemblies ago, we piloted a fellows program with the idea that for some partners who are doing particularly remarkable work and operating in the kind of context that I've already described, which can be highly authoritarian and not much room for civil society and communal space, that it made more sense to bring people onto the IPM staff team, as you will, as a fellow, and to use it as an educational opportunity, an opportunity for professional and personal development, rather than trying to fund a partner organization that in some way the funding itself could run foul of the law. So we were thrilled to have Hemant be the first person in that role. We've had a couple of other folks serve in that capacity since, including Pavleen, who some of you met during our India International Executive Board meeting, who's the foundress of HUM, Hindus United with Muslims, in Ahmedabad. A young man named Sashi, who does work in Delhi that's really quite extraordinary with children whose families are forced to eke out a living in the city dump there. With Sony, who many of you know is in Nepal and was a former staff member of an IPM project partner there that Leah Schulte started years ago. And when Leah, because also of this kind of crackdown, was increasingly unable to attain visa and permission to work in Nepal, she turned the program over to Phumati Thapa, who's now on the IPM board, and Sony, who's located not in Bandipur, where the capital, where the project is, but in the capital of Kathmandu. And because of real difficulties that they were having directly in achieving funding, it seemed to make sense for us to include Sony directly as a fellow on the staff to help allow that, that work. Bindia, as I said, is the newest person. She's a member of the Dalit community in Golana herself, and she's really continues to be an inspiration for literally thousands of women and girls in her community. Apart from regular work, as you know, we've been trying to engage increasingly, or sort of forced to engage in this climate in what I guess would historically be called relief work, or for those of you who've been involved with IPM long enough, you might remember something called the Emergency Fund, which used to be 99. You could designate your gift for Fund 99, which was sort of our emergency relief fund. We've been using emergency donations that have been sourced in the United States, but also increasingly, and in a really positive step, I think, for IPM, in country, in India and in El Salvador in particular, to support the immediate needs of some of our partners and the communities they work with there. So far this year, Pochabai alone has helped almost 4,400 families, 4,368, and accessing more than the equivalent of US $30,000 in food and relief supplies. I think it's actually closer to 32,000 now. There's also been incredible growth in that kind of support in El Salvador, which I'll come to in a moment. The second major development well, there have been two major developments, I should say, with Pochabai and with Hima Mbindia's work. One has been the development of a children's center, which is the first of its kind in the community for the Dalit children. And I believe some of you were on the call when Mahesh shared that this is sort of the first time that non-Dalit children are coming to the center and sharing food and water with the local Dalit children, which is really a huge, it would be hard to overstate the kind of social breakthrough that is within the community. A community that's very segregated between sort of the landowning elite and the Dalits who work for them. The second major development has been that women from other castes are also coming forward and approaching Hima Mbindia for support. More than 85 women from a local fishing community came forward to help form their own collective. The collective is known as Devi Pujak or Devi Pujak Community. And they are initiating a small fish and chicken-based businesses as part of their response to the pandemic. The lack of transport, obviously, in India at this point makes it harder to do this work. And so a lot of what continues to happen there is happening right in the community and is quite remarkable, including more recently, the installation of a number of wells in an area of India that is, the soil is heavily saline, and it makes it very difficult to get fresh drinking water or potable water for the families. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the work which we will highlight again in the coming weeks and are highlighting currently with our end of the year mailings to our donors and friends that some of you may have already received or you will in the next couple of weeks. That work has continued really unabated, and I want to give particular credit to Adela Zayas, who's been serving as the regional director in Latin America and the Caribbean since Fatima Pacas moved to Albany, New York to complete a Fulbright fellowship, which she is about 6 months away from completing at this time. Adela is our regional director and is now also the international director of programs and partnerships. So one of the exciting things that's happened with IPM in the past few months is that our leadership team is now made up, the majority, 4 of the 7 members of the leadership team are women or people of color from countries outside the United States. And Adela is joined in El Salvador by Vicky Jimenez, who's coordinating the Immersion Experience Program, and Aneta Ramos, who in the new year is going to be serving as our new resource mobilization officer and joining the leadership team because she just does really remarkable research and written work from where she is in El Salvador. Adela has been fighting a bit of a stomach bug, and I think that's why she's probably not on the call again this morning. But she's been coordinating those activities along with Aneta and Vicky, and working as well with Alyssa Bovell on the survey that I think many of you have heard about related to how IPM is responding directly to COVID-19. When the board met in November, Alyssa presented her initial results. Now we're working with Jacinta. Some of you will recall from the Watoto wa Luanga vocational training program in the Kibera community in Nairobi. Jacinta is working alongside longtime staff member Jared Odiambo to collect interviews with IPM Project Partners in Kenya so that we can be sure to include their input in the final report that we'll be looking at when we meet in the spring and begin our planning, particularly for the 3rd General Assembly in 2022. But let me just highlight for you briefly some updates since the last time I think I facilitated one of these conversations, and at least through the end of November. As of November 27th, the project coordinator, Marta Arroyo, in Ibagué, Colombia. She works with what's called there the Center for the Formation of Peace, and another organization that's called Ser Mujer, or I guess We Are Women. There are people with better Spanish on this call than me, but that's how I would translate it. They've provided in the last few months a basic food bag, which is sort of enough to allow someone to eat for a month, to over 50 women whose families, numerically, probably we're talking about something like 250 people in direct response to COVID-19 and the inability, the real economic crisis that rural parts of Colombia are going through right now. And I say rural, even though Ibagué is a large city, many of the people that live there are people that have come from the countryside, particularly fully indigenous folks who have lost their opportunities to work because of the former conflict there. And now that's been complicated further by the pandemic. And they've kind of come to the city in mass numbers and are living on the street near the train and other state bus stations there. And that's a part of where Marta is doing her work. And with Acamujerza in Zaragoza, a couple of you were on the virtual immersion that we did in El Salvador this past weekend, or 2 weekends ago now. So you may have heard this directly, but they asked IPM to provide a micro loan of $6,000, which we were able to come up with as sort of an advance for government funding that is always a year or two behind, it seems, for the clothing program, the uniform program they do with the government in support of the local public school. Akapamu in Armenia continues to be a really vital partner of us, and in many ways, probably the partner that's struggling the most personally in their own community. They've had a number of family members, extended family members, and even women in the cooperative get sick during the pandemic. One of the leading members of the cooperative, Conchita, lost her father to COVID, and they continue to struggle with the mayor there, the water project that he's trying to take over. And sort of another example, this is a sort of far-right mayor in El Salvador who never wanted to help at all, and allowing these two sort of on the other side of the tracks, quite literally communities on the outskirts of Armenia to have access to potable water. And when the women organized themselves in partnership with a group of Catholic women religious from Wisconsin to build to get a tank drilled of water, the mayor immediately began to hassle them and is still continuing, sorry, that's my phone in the background, still continuing to make it difficult in every way imaginable for the women to continue to control that project. We did create a small health emergency fund for the women so that they could continue to immediate health needs at some and additional support for the electrical system that's involved with keeping the pump going so that the water can be brought up from the well. In Zacatecoluca, which is a very rural community of mostly ex-combatants in El Salvador, a new partner, relatively new partner of IPM, IDIS, and I would invite you, if you're interested, to reach out to Vicky. We have a wonderful video that she did meeting with 3 of the coordinators of that project and hearing their work around organizing the farming, the school and library for the children, and particularly a reproductive health and gender identity program for young people. IDIS does really incredible work, and IPM was recently able to make a $2,000 commitment to support their work in the 16 communities where they are working. Right now, we're trying to secure funding. There's a space that has a very rudimentary kind of tin roof shelter that's sort of the community center without walls. And with the storms again this past year, and I won't belabor that as we talked at an earlier forum about the immediate response to the tropical storm season, we're hoping to be able to help them make that facility more year-round accessible and frankly more appropriate for the kind of activities they want to run there with children and particularly with young people. Nutravita. Anna is on the call, so I won't spend too much time talking about Nutravita. She can always do that if you'd like to ask her directly. But we're working on a number of, they're working on a number of really important initiatives, and our staff have been working with Anna directly on the long-term viability of the project. As you probably know, Anna is one of two expatriate project partners that we still have anywhere in the world, which is very different than when Jane, who's on the call, and I were asked to join the IPM board back in 1997, 98, when I'd say at least 50%, it was probably higher, of the project coordinators were missionaries or former missionaries living and working abroad. Now, Anna and Joanna are two extraordinary exceptions, and they're extraordinary in every respect, not only in that they're the only two expatriate project coordinators we have, but their commitment and the way that they've really stayed committed to the local community and raised up a community around them has really been, I think it was Vicky who was referring to Joanna in the DR the other day. Just simply extraordinary. You never see someone who works so hard and is so committed to the community, and her two daughters who were born in the Dominican Republic. The Patronato Lydia Cocciola, I think you all know, is still IPM's largest project partner in terms of real funding. There's no way that that partner really could generate income on their own. It's primarily a pre-K program for 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. That's sort of their core work. They also have the tutoring, or what they call a reinforcement program, for children from that age all the way through college, a scholarship program, an environmental awareness program, a program called Tu Decides, You Decide, which is again about sort of agency that young people need to have over their own bodies and their own sexuality that is so often denied them in their community, and so threatened, frankly, by the local gang or organized crime situation. So Lydia Cocciola is our largest partner in terms of funding. We will donate somewhere in the neighborhoods of $25,000 or $30,000 alone to them this year. They can't generate really any income on their own, given their work. And we continue to support the faculty, the 3 teachers that are directly involved with the little kids in the tutoring program, as a way to, really just allow that project to continue its work, which is quite remarkable. And we're fortunate that we have a donor group, a congregation in California, and a family in Cleveland that are large supporters of Lydia Cocciola, the patronage as a whole. In Nicaragua, I want to just quickly, because of the time, there's really nothing. I could never be positive enough about the work of Xenia Chavez and her team at Saprosi in Ninderé and the surrounding communities. I would say, and I don't mean this to be critical of anyone, I mean this to be positive of them. There's probably no women's cooperative that I've encountered in my time with IPM that's as well organized and is able to get as much done in under really difficult circumstances as Saprosi. And we made a donation in response to COVID of about $1,500 to help with what they call basic food baskets for 75 women and their families who just are not able. It's difficult enough to make any kind of living there in the best of times, let alone in the current times. And with a sister project, Mujer en Comunidad in San Francisco Libre, which is also quite extraordinary and is actually the project that was the model for Acumujerza in El Salvador. In response to COVID-19, IPM, through our regional staff and their really incredible work, was able to provide over 100 cleaning supply kits with alcohol, disinfectants, masks, gloves, etc., for their really important work. They have a clinic there. They work with the local police and an anti-domestic violence program. and a number of other things in the community. The young people have a radio that is really the lifeline, if you will, for real news, non-fake news, if you will, in their community. And I was remiss also not to mention the involvement of the children at Lydia Cochola in what's known as Radio Balsamo in Zaragoza, in a program that they run that's called Catch the Wave, which is really a wonderful program, weekly program for young people to share how they're coping with any number of things that are common in adolescence, but particularly during this time of lockdown and the rise of authoritarianism in El Salvador. I do want to highlight, just before I sort of open it up, that we're very excited that Fatima Pacas, who has served as the regional director and has been doing her Fulbright at the University of Albany in these extraordinary times, has agreed. We had to sort of make that offer to allow her to get a Fulbright in the first place, or qualify, that we would potentially hire her back. It looks like she's going to be doing what's known as optional practical training with us. And what optional practical training entails is that she'll spend, looks like, 8 to 12 months based in the Cleveland office, learning about how international nonprofit works, because we imagine Fatima ascending into further leadership with IPM over time. She's a remarkable young professional who many of you know. So she'll be spending a year based in Cleveland, but also working in St. Louis and New England and some other places, probably coming out to San Francisco. I see a couple of Californians following us, to meet with donors and talk a little bit more about our work. And we're looking forward to her doing that. She will finish, if all goes well, in May, and then be with us for a full year, during which time Adela herself will be exploring a similar option, so that she might be able to go off and work on her master's, as Vicky and Aneta also step into, as I mentioned earlier, additional leadership in their communities. So I didn't really want to focus so much on the US election. I think those of you who know me well know my position on that. Some of you were, one of you at least, was in India with me 4 years ago when we were having, or a couple of you, where we were having some really interesting conversations the day after the last election. And here we are 4 years later. I will say, somebody asked me about the ambassador to the UN. Jane may know her better. I'm not convinced she's the most, progressive woman that could have been appointed. And I know that my Kenyan spouse has some really mixed feelings about her appointment. Maybe would have hoped for someone else. But I do think that there's some real positive things obviously happening in the world. And as I, in our government, as I reflected personally, I think it was 4 or 5 days after the election, and we were on a call, and I just kind of lost it emotionally, because there's a lot to be said, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, for representation, and for young people to be able to see women and people of color and people from the LGBTQ community and others in positions of leadership, and not just to see folks who look like me, albeit probably clean shaven and without an earring. But there's a real beauty, I think, right now in kids like mine, but kids all over this country, who are able to see themselves and the people that are being appointed to positions. Even, I think, as we realize, and we thought a lot about and talked a lot about as an organization during the waning years of the Obama administration, that perhaps we let our guard down because we were so happy sort of with who he was, or his family was, and what they embodied in the White House. Many of their policies were things that IPM certainly couldn't agree with in the kinds of ways that we might have liked to. So we'll have to keep whatever pressure we can. As some people have said, we can work with the current administration, I think, around issues that are of importance to us, particularly around immigration. Probably saw in the news again, additional news this week about DACA and what might be happening for people with temporary protected status, from El Salvador in particular, which is, the country of the Northern Triangle with whom we work the most. But we're living in times where authoritarianism clearly has an appeal. I'm not exactly sure why. I have some feelings about what that might be about. But I also think the pandemic and some of the news we've heard, even in the last 24 or 48 hours, about the lack of availability of vaccines, could lead to further alienation and distrust of the political system, which ultimately gives rise to dictators on both the left and the right. So I want to thank you for your time, and I really want to open this up for the purpose of this quarterly forum to allow you to ask me anything you want, and also to allow those who I've mentioned, which I think is at least half of you, at least on the Zoom call, if not on Facebook, to correct me or chime in if I misrepresented anything or there's anything additional you'd like to share. And we have about, according to me, we've got about 15 minutes, so it wasn't too bad. Mahesh, Bindia, Vicky, Anita, is there anything, Hemant, anything I didn't add that you'd like to see added to this presentation? I'm not sure if, I can't tell if the Facebook feed is now running or not, but we've had a couple people ask us in advance to share this with them. So is there anything you'd like to get on the record that we can make sure they know about as they consider their year-end commitments to IPM and their ongoing engagement with us?
I just have something to share, which I've also put it in the text in the chat box.
No,
there was a hunger project in 11 states of India. They did a survey, and it turns out that large proportion of poor are still skipping meals and go to bed hungry. 56% of the respondents never had to skip meals before the lockdown. Of them, 1 in 7 had to either skip meals often or sometimes in September or October. And secondly, 27% respondents sometimes went to bed without eating. About 1 in 20 households often went to bed without eating. So just to give you a glimpse of it, I'll send you the more detailed findings from the report. And just to add to that, income levels have, employment income levels have really gone down. And for a large number of people, there's no change in their economic status. 43% of them had no income in April, May, and out of this, only about 3% have gone back to income levels of what it was before lockdown. 56% of those who had no income in April and May continue to have no income in September and October. This is just to give you a glimpse of the enormity of the problems that the poor are facing in the country. And I think we're going to have a large number of hunger deaths emerging soon. Because nutritional levels are low, calorific intake has gone down. It's a dismal picture, even as some of us are privileged to have enough food for our own families. But the picture is very bleak. I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you for adding that, Mahesh. I think that's one of the things that I was talking to a colleague who will remain nameless just because it was a kind of private conversation the other day. And, you know, I was just saying that, and maybe it's as someone said during the virtual immersion, it's my Catholic guilt, even though I don't affiliate formally with the Catholic Church anymore. But, you know, there's a lot of talk about how difficult the pandemic has been for people in the United States and stuck at home, can't have Thanksgiving together, et cetera, et cetera. And that's certainly all true. But, the level of relative comfort here, even in the midst of a pandemic, is so far beyond what so many of our partners and the people that they work with are dealing with. It's only exacerbated clearly by the pandemic, and that's something I think we all have to wrestle with individually. You know, we have to wrestle with within our own households how we allocate our income and what we support. You know, while I've been proud that IPM is still here, there's some probably in April or May that were wondering how we might make it through this year. And with this bequest that we received from Grace Weber in a pretty healthy financial position, arguably the best financial position we've been in a number of years. That doesn't mean just like not taking our eye off the ball in the political process, not constantly coming back and checking, I'll speak for myself, our own, what we're doing individually in response to what's happening in the world. and how we might be able to do more. I was raised to think there's always more that you can do, and that may have caused difficulty for me at points in my life. But I certainly, it's really quite overwhelming what people are dealing with now on a day-to-day basis, among our partners and even in parts of this country, for sure. Yeah, no, Jane is I just draw your attention to it, a really, just a wonderful comment. And thank you, Jane. And I would just say that I think it's always dangerous for me to speak. I won't speak for Ilse. I'll try to speak with Ilse. That's one of the things that we've really talked about a lot during this pandemic, and with Doug Lanero, who's in our age cohort. We're sort of the three old people in Cleveland or in the US. And we just say that the past year, and I mentioned Fatima a lot because Fatima walked into the the regional office at a time when we were in a real pickle. I mean, Anna is well aware of it. We had overpromised all kinds of things to our partners after visiting El Salvador repeatedly, sort of raised the bar, then kind of vaporized with our staff member, which was a little problematic. And all of a sudden there we were without any representation in El Salvador. And Fatima Pacas came in and really recreated that office. And then by identifying Adela, and then Adela identifying Vicky and Aneda, and Mahesh doing similarly with the fellows that I mentioned earlier, but particularly with Heman and Bindia, who are on the call, and Sony. There's a really wonderful, I guess we put Mahesh in that older person group on this, at IPM, but for everyone else, there's just a huge group of people that are, I won't call Heman out, he's a little older, but people under 30 who are, or right around 30, early 30s, mid to late 20s, who have sort of bubbled up from our partners in the regions and who are stepping into leadership with IPM. And as many of you know, I've said, I don't think there could be any better legacy for the board than not to put itself out of business, but to see itself be recreated with sort of project partner leadership, which in fact now is the case, with Xenia coming in to the co-chair role with Clint, and also the staff being, I think the phrase in the States is majority minority. That's not really what I mean, but I know Vicky was working on a little proposal that someone asked us to put together, and it was, some of the questions, even a few years ago, through all of our best efforts, we would have had a really hard time answering. And now it was like, well, actually, no. It's something like 70, I think if you add in, all the fellows and everyone, I mean, almost 80% of the IPM team now, and we have to be careful about how we talk about staff and fellows in certain parts of the world, are in the regions and in the countries where we work. And that's a really beautiful and transformative thing, or certainly has the potential to be so. Mahesh, we'll follow up later. Whenever I talk about Modi, I always think like, what trouble am I getting myself into? And more importantly, what trouble might I be getting my friends into? So I'm going to back off a little bit, but and I tried to moderate it by being just as critical of Daniel Ortega, who was a hero of mine, who I'm completely disappointed in at the moment. Any other questions? Any other comments? Vicky or Nate? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add, Joe, you could, I really appreciate you always drawing attention to including me in that circle of more mature.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Mary Laporte were here, I'd never hear the end of it.
The thing is, and like you said, and you can speak for me anytime, because you and I have talked about a lot, especially this time of year when we focus on gratitude. We've seen so much heartache and so many challenges this year with regard to the pandemic and other things, whether it's the tropical storms or cyclones or what have you, that have really challenged our partners. And extraordinary ways. And, you know, it's just been amazing to see the resiliency that our partners have. And I know I speak for Joe, for you at this point, you know, for us to have the regional staff that we do, you know, that are really making such an impact to walk side by side in solidarity and shoulder to shoulder, and to sacrifice so much of themselves to live out our mission. And that gratitude goes equally for our board, you know, as we've gone through our strategic planning and had to modify our goals and objectives, you know, the way that the board continues to really advocate and live out our mission to include everyone's voice that we work with. It's not, you know, just sitting there and coming up with, you know, what we're going to do. Our partners' voices and their needs are what draws value to our goals and our objectives. And it's the donors and the supporters and each of you that join these forums and care, you know, whether you volunteer, whether you send a financial contribution. You know, we could never thank you enough for allowing this small organization, which I have such incredible personal pride being a part of for the past 14 years, that makes truly life-changing impact and differences in the lives of people. And it is a season of gratitude, and we are sincerely grateful each and for every one of you. So I think that's all.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm just looking at
Good morning, everyone. I just want to give you an update. Yesterday, we visited two creative muses in Armenia. And so we deliver the donation that were collected during the 2 virtual immersion experiences that we had in El Salvador. So they are going to use this money to pay the receipts of water and electricity. So the project water can continue in the community and continue benefits to all the people there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Aneta, and thank you for all your good work. I know you had to step up a little bit this week with Adela being under the weather. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Any questions? I'm sorry, as I said, I'm looking down, trying to check on this Facebook feed. If this does not transmit now, and this will seem weird if people look at it later, but we'll upload it later. As I said, we had a couple people specifically ask if we were going to record this so that they can be part of the conversation. Vicki, anything, not to put you on the spot, but anything you'd like to add or update us on quickly, just in relation specifically to the upcoming open immersion experience, virtual immersion experience in India? I know that some folks have expressed an interest in that, and I can tell you, and I think Clint can speak to this, the one that Vicki coordinated just last weekend, I think was by far, we've kind of found, I guess, our groove and how to make this virtual experience almost as powerful and almost as moving as the real one, the in-person one. It was really compelling, and we've heard nothing but wonderful feedback since on both sides, the partners that were able to share directly with those that were on Zoom, and certainly the people that were on Zoom learning alongside them.
Yes, sure, thank you. Yes, we are working currently in 2 immersions. We have one with a closed academic group that will go from January 11th to January the 15th, and this one will be a 1 country in BIP, or virtual immersion program, to the Dominican Republic. And we're starting another one that it's an open BIP to India that will start on middle February and will go through 6 weeks through March. We will be meeting once a week and have around 2 or 2.5 sessions each week in just 1 day. For this one, my wonderful colleague Mahesh will be the one in charge, and we are still working a lot on it. So we are very, very happy to be working on it, and we're very excited to see what it will look like. So yeah.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Vicky. And I know that Adela would also want to acknowledge, what a wonderful job you've been doing. So I'm sorry she's not able to join us, but we, as I said, we're very excited that starting on January 1st, Vicky and Anita will both be new full-time members of the leadership team, which is really exciting, and joining Adela on that. And then Fatima, as she returns, is going to be taking on a number of operational responsibilities for IPM as part of her OPT. That's one of her strong suits, and something she wants to learn a little bit about as she imagines her future in leadership in the NGO or nonprofit sector. Anything else, Bindia, Hemet, anything you'd like to add at this point?
I think now in India, our farmers, they protect for their rights in last 15 days. No? So now they are in Delhi, and in our government, sorry, they have 3 new laws, and farmers, they have that 3 laws. One is that minimum MSP, minimum support price. Second is APMC market we have, and government, that law is like that APMC market is removing. And third is corporate farming. So small and marginalized farmers, they are worried about their farming, and so they protect this law against this law. So in 15th day they are started, and now in villages and near cities, so farmer protect the law. So it's difficult. Yes.
Yeah. Difficult. India, is there anything you'd like to add quickly before we wind down, or?
Joe, I think everyone has covered most of the things. I would just like to add some of not political things and all. I'm not good at it, but I just want to make an update. With the kids, we are doing Christmas preparations now. They are preparing some amazing dance performances, and we are looking forward for the celebration right now in our classes. Thank you.
I think everyone is really looking forward to that, particularly Vicky. I never thought I would be working with an organization with 2 dance experts in 2 different countries as part of a small staff. So it's really, as someone who's not much of a dancer, I'm really glad that you 2 are able to do that. And
sure.
Certainly nice when
we'll be sharing the videos.
Yeah. Well, it's nice when we're stuck at home to have an excuse or someone motivating us to stand up and move our bodies rather than just look at the screen. So I just want to remind everyone, next week is kind of a special day this year, a unique day. Typically in Cleveland, we have 2 annual events that are as much fundraising as fundraising, as well as the St. Louis Donor Appreciation Brunch that I referenced earlier, which is when we actually started this forum series as a way to engage folks in St. Louis, since unfortunately we weren't able to be with them in person. And so a few years ago, we rebranded, or the sort of little volunteer group in Cleveland rebranded Namaste as One Night for One World. One Night for One World, which is a wonderful multicultural celebration of food and music and dancing and silent auction, you name it, and really a great opportunity for a few hundred people or more to get together and celebrate IPM in our hometown. This year, because of the challenges of the pandemic and our inability to get together, we're basically going to have one day for One World, and throughout the day, starting in the morning, through a little mini concert with Peter Mayer in the evening, where there's going to be opportunities for folks to share just a 20 to 40-second video about gratitude for being a member of the IPM family and what being part of IPM means for them. Some of you have been asked to provide videos, so if you haven't done that yet, we'd love for you to send those in to Ilsa or I. And we'll be sharing a bunch of them with some background, a little bit more detail from what I shared earlier during the normal virtual forum time. And then between the 18th, which is the final day of Hanukkah, if my calendar is right, through January 6th, which is the Epiphany, which is a hugely important holiday in many of the countries where we work. Each day we'll be sharing other snippets of gratitude from across the IPM family as we hope to continue to inspire one another and reflect on what a difficult year this has been, but all the promise and the opportunities for joy and peace and light and love that we've all felt this year in our work together. So I'd encourage you to communicate with Ilsa or I directly if you're interested in putting a little video together. If you've been asked to and you haven't been able to do it, the deadline was supposed to be today, but I think we're giving everyone until the 15th to get those in. Is that right, Ilsa? It's the 15th now?
Yes, that would be great.
And then we'll have a little bit of a more formal sharing of videos and information next Friday when we gather, and then snippets each day for the weeks to follow. We won't have a forum the following week. That probably won't surprise you, since that's Christmas Day and the following week is New Year's Day. So that will be the last time we'll be gathering together virtually in this format until the new year. So I want to thank all of you for being with us today, particularly those of you, and there are a few, who seem to have been with us every Friday going back to May 10th. This has been one of the real blessings of this time we're living in, to be able to be together like this each week. And I hope that as Peter always says, that the peace that passes all understanding will be with you the rest of this day and in the coming week as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again next Friday. Thanks for your time and for your attention. And be well.
Yep. Take